I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocities in Music, the best kept secret in music reviews. This is a very exciting review because we have yet to review an album by Paul McCartney.
It's true.
We've never reviewed a Beatles album either.
No, we haven't.
We're going to save that for episode 1000, I think. But this is episode, or review 699. I guess we don't call it episodes anymore because we're too cool for that.
Yep.
This is Paul McCartney's 16th studio album, titled New. That's a pretty apt title.
It is
now,
new.
in 2012, Tom, he came out with an album called Kisses on the Bottom.
Yes.
That we elected not to review.
That's true.
Why did we elect not to review Kisses on the Bottom?
Well, it wasn't just the title, Jake. But all that was kind of...
We didn't want to dive into butt kisses.
No, we really didn't. Even though it is Paul. But no, the big thing is that, you know, it wasn't an album of all original material from Paul. He was going for a bit of a different style, and it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel like something we could come in here, put our reviewing hats on, and assess accurately for what he was going for and the scope of Paul's career.
It was definitely a different album in a different direction, and quite honestly, it felt more like a project than an actual album to us.
Exactly.
So I never felt like we were going to be able to do it justice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas New was a much more traditional Paul McCartney album in the Paul McCartney canon of albums. In 2007, he came out with Memory Almost Full, which we actually really liked. Memory Almost Full. We haven't reviewed that here, but whereas a lot of critics out there were a bit wishy-washy on that album, they they had definitely had some highlight tracks. I would say that. Little bit of track displacement, but it was a Paul McCartney album in the vein of his classic second album, Rain. Which to Tom and I, just to get that out of the way, that is an album that shaped both of our kind of music learning and love. So to have an album that harkens back to that is definitely something that Tom and I, appeals to Tom and I. I would say New is in the same vein. Yeah. Tom, what about New really took you away and made you go, wow, I like this as a Paul McCartney album?
Really what it came down to was, well, a couple of things. First off, that classic Paul McCartney songwriting style. I mean, he's had it for as long as he's been writing music. But then also him taking the production a little bit different for direction. Now, Memory Almost Full had a very, very compressed sound. It was a very loud album. It was a loud album. And it had some kind of experimental aspects to it. Everything was very crisp, very clear. This is too, but not in an overblown way. It's more in kind of an electronic way. But you still get a lot of realness from this. I mean, on like track 5, Early Days, a little bit more acoustic driven. You have those classic elements as well. There are spots on this album that really remind me of things that he's done before, but not from any they're not all from the same era. What I mean by that is you kind of have the new era of Paul McCartney from like the late 90s up till today, and I actually think that some of that work has been some of his best. Albums like Flaming Pie, Driving Rain, Chaos and Creation in the Backyard, those have been terrific, I think. They've been a little bit kind of mixed reviews from critics. That's something you mentioned, and that's actually something I want to address real quick, is that it's hard to trust critics on Paul McCartney, and talking about us included. Exactly. I'm not saying we're above all that. Because you always get, and just, if you don't believe me, go to Metacritic and look up any of his albums on there. There's always someone that gives it a 100, and there's always someone who gives it like around a 40 at least, or multiple people. And the reason is that you have people who are always going to love Paul regardless because it's Paul, and you always have people who won't love the new Paul stuff just because it's not old Paul stuff. It's kind of for the same reason, but they take it in different directions. And I don't think that either of those extremes are really applicable to any of his recent work. No. I think it's always somewhere in the middle. So I would say kind of be wary of those extremes, because New is not an exception. It is a good album. It is not incredible, but there are some really good things about it. I mentioned the songwriting. I mentioned the production moving in a different direction. And songwriting, though, is a little bit vague, so let's dive into that a little bit, if that's all right. So the album starts out with Save Us, which is kind of more your typical, it's an under 3-minute classic kind of Paul McCartney rocking track. Yeah. And it has a really good, I think Paul McCartney's vocals, which is something I'll get to a little bit later, but his harmonized vocals in Save Us is I think,
one of the highlights of that track. Save Us is actually my favorite track on the album.
Oh, really? Okay,
I just think that it's a great opener. It really sets the stage. It then goes into Alligator, which has a playful sound, and its structure is kind of alternating, and it's just a really coy way of approaching it. You have several other tracks coming up after that, On My Way to Work, which I think that, you know, the dichotomy between the really soft, pretty verse and then that just clangy, rocking guitar riff.
It's a great part.
Yeah, the contrast there. I mean, that is what encompasses classic Paul McCartney songwriting. He's been doing that since his first self-titled record back in 1970. You know, and then it follows with Queenie Eye, which you like a little bit more than I do, but I do still feel like it's a strong song. I feel like the strength, and this is where I start to get to my beef with New. I feel like the strength of this album is in the front half of the record.
I totally agree.
Now, when you start to get to tracks like Appreciate, Everybody Out There, I Can Bet, Looking at Her, I really don't feel like those tracks hold their own in comparison to the first few tracks. Tracks like Hosanna, track 9, I actually thought was a really good song, just moody, a little bit more of, I don't even like saying it's an experiment for Paul, because Paul, you go back and listen to some of the tracks.
Listen to McCartney.
He's done everything. Helter Skelter, like the first metal song ever written, right? Track 12, Road, which had the, you know, the bonus track on it. I felt like that was a really good closing track. It showed I kind of got vibes that, you know, Paul's looking ahead at his life. I mean, the guy's what, 70 years old now, looking ahead. Like, death is ahead of this guy, and he's still putting out great music. So to get that commentary, I thought was cool. So I did feel like this album was very hit or miss, and that track disparity, especially when all the best tracks are on the front end of the album, really makes it hard to listen to the second half of the album. The album listening experience is negatively affected when that happens. So it's harder for me to really enjoy it as an album.
And that's a big thing for me. I mean, I think that if the back half of this album was as good as the front half, this would easily be a low to mid 80s album.
Yeah.
And I think it would just be an incredible testament to Paul's career, really, once again. But I don't think it's quite there. I think this is very enjoyable. I think it's a good addition to his catalog.
Yeah, even the tracks that aren't my favorites, I still find a lot of things that I like about them.
Yeah, exactly. They're not just terrible. Now, I think there are some weaker spots, like Everybody Out There I'm not a huge fan of. I Can Bet, which both of those sound kind of like they would be B-sides from like the Driving Rain era. But they don't, I think for an album like this, where he's already set up something a little bit different in the beginning, I don't think those two tracks really hold their weight quite as much.
No, it doesn't fit with the idea and the motif that he established in the first 3 tracks.
Exactly, and especially on tracks like On My Way to Work and Early Days, where he's obviously reflecting on his past. It's a little bit more nostalgic. I think those tracks work well. And then New, going right from Early Days to New, you know, talking about where he's at now. I think that's a cool idea.
Right.
And it makes it more personal. But then you get to, like I said, Everybody Out There, I Can Bet, and even like Looking at Her, which is an okay track, but like
that's my least favorite track.
They just kind of stray from the path a little bit, and I think that it dilutes the potency of the statement he's trying to make with New.
Yeah, and I mean, Paul McCartney has in the Beatles in general, they always had eclectic albums that genre hopped.
Yeah.
And yet, but they were still able to have enough theming and motifs that to tie it all together, to put that bow around it that I always talk about, and make it one cohesive album. Listen, where this doesn't feel that way. Part of that might be is that Paul definitely had many different producers for most of these tracks. So you do get a little I think, difference in sound on most of these tracks. It doesn't always sound like it's on the same record. And that makes this feel like a compilation to me. A compilation of relatively good tracks, but still a compilation nonetheless. Whenever I get that, it always ruins the experience, or at least lessens the experience a little bit for the album listen, and brings my score down. So, that being said, I'm going to go 75 on this record.
I'm going 78.
Now, I'd say that that's still probably a little inflated. If this weren't a Paul McCartney record, I would probably go a little bit lower.
I don't know.
I love this man. He's a personal hero of mine, you know? He's a guitar hero. I mean, that's what he is, and you know, I'll always come back to most of his records and say this is what I want to listen to. You know, besides that one Christmas song he did, which I can't
Wonderful
say.
Christmas.
Oh man, I'm so dreading having to listen to that song here in a couple months. So dreading that.
It's so bad.
Yeah, and it's played all the time. Yeah, I just can't. But all of his albums are pretty good. So and I like Paul McCartney, so I will come back to this. Maybe a little bit inflated, but 77 from Velocity Music is what you guys get from us, which means it is solid. It is an album that you should check out, especially if you're into Paul McCartney. Let us know what you thought of New at www.velocitiesmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesmusic. As always, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and let us know what albums you'd like to see us review on this channel. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV moving music critique forward.